Hello and welcome back to TABE Reading M. We're going to tackle Strategy 8 today, which is on point of view. Make sure that you've got your paper copy of this book, TABE Reading M, or have a digital scan pulled up from here in Canvas. We are, cruising right along. We're almost finished with the second unit in this text, and there are only three, so we're certainly headed towards the home stretch here. Primarily today we're going to be looking at literary texts. Those are fiction that have fictional characters that are, engage in dialogue, speak to other characters, commit actions within the stories. So primarily we're going to be looking at those kinds of texts. But what you're learning today will apply to informational texts as well. Point of view is a pretty broad topic, and it has a certain application in literary text. The way we talk about it's a little bit different in informational text, but that's kind of the focus of the next lesson. Today we're just going to look at how they are applied in literary text and in fiction. Okay, in fiction, point of view refers to who is telling the story. There are three main points of view. The chart below describes each. So in the way that in the real world we could look at something, an object or a scene or a person from a certain location and have a certain angle on that scene or that person or object, we can have a similar point of view, a similar concept in fiction. So the point of view of one character may be radically different than the point of view of another. And so we are kind of talking about a visual perspective. But in literature, we're talking about something specific, which is who tells the story? Who is it? And we'll get into the options as we go through here. You may have noticed that we're missing one here. There should be first, second, and third person. We do not have second. We do have two types of third person, which we'll get into. I do plan to talk about second person a little bit, but it just doesn't appear as much in literary text, which is why it's not here. Okay, so first person. We can talk about this in the terms of literature and even in terms of grammar. When we're making verbs agree with their subjects, sometimes we talk about first, second, and third person. First person, I, second person, you, third person, he, she, they, it. But first person is when we have a character who is part of the story, who's the narrator. All right, so the narrator talks to other characters in the story, is able to interact with them, has actions or events happen in their life. So they are part of the story. In fact, when we tell stories ourselves to our friends and our families, most of the time, 9 times out of 10, we're going to tell it in first person because we're talking about something that happened to us or that we were a part of. So a lot of times literary texts take on that same sort of mode. It's a storyteller that is involved in the story they're telling, and tells it in a very close first-person perspective. Hey, it happened to me, in order to make it much more in-depth and a richer experience. Second person is addressing you, or even in plural in the South, y'all. In literature, we don't see it that much because it would be something like, you open the door, you walk into a shadowy room, you hear strange noises. And yeah, we've probably read some fiction here and there like that, but most fiction doesn't address a reader personally and make the reader a character in the story. Some experimental types may, but you see second person in informational text a lot more. Like maybe they're trying to guide you as the reader through a process or give you some form of advice. And they may use second person and address you, the reader, personally. But here in third person, this is when it gets a little bit more complicated in the world of literature, and we have to break it down into a couple different types. But yes, in the basic sense, third person refers to not me, first person, not you, second person, but third person, a third person that is not me and not you. So he, she, they, it, if we're talking about animals or objects, those pronouns are third person. But in literature, we have two different types of third person, limited and omniscient, which I'm going to define and explain. So third person limited is in many ways kind of a half step between first and third person. And as I read the description, maybe that'll kind of click. A narrator outside of the story events tells what happened, but the narrator only reveals what one character thinks or feels. So we have a third person narrator using pronouns like he, she, they, using characters' names. The narrator is not involved in the story at all, probably makes no reference to themselves at all. But it's similar to first person in that the narrator only knows what one character in the story is thinking. So in some ways, it's kind of like the story is being told in first person, even though it's being told in third, because you are only privy to. That means that you have access to one character's thoughts. Mystery stories that have a detective as their main character a lot of times use this sort of perspective because we are discovering the clues along with the detective. We may not know any more than the detective does. We're following that point of view as if he, the detective, were telling it himself. But we also are able to feel suspense because we only know what the character knows. And so, events that are coming down the line are uncertain. They're a big unknown. So using this limited point of view can certainly increase the amount of suspense in a story, or even our feelings of closeness with the character in the story. Okay. Third person omniscient, and I have talked previously about breaking words down into prefixes, roots, suffixes, and this one is another one that comes from Greek and cleanly breaks down like that. So the prefix omni means all, and the rest of it, the scient, you probably recognize this from the word science, which means knowledge. So omniscient means all-knowing, if we break it down. But here's how it plays out in the world of literature. So, like Limited, we have a narrator who's outside the story, maybe unnamed, probably makes zero reference to himself, but the narrator tells what every character is thinking or feeling. Maybe not every character in the story, but is able to tell us about multiple characters' thoughts within a story. So if two characters are having an argument, the author may describe what both of them are thinking as they say whatever it is they say in argument. Bigger epic stories are often told in this way, where authors need to describe the thoughts and feelings and motivations of more than just one character. Certainly if you think about movies, TV shows, media of that sort, they typically don't show the action from the point of view of one character. We have different scenes from the point of view of a lot of different characters. And that's a kind of omniscient or third-person omniscient storytelling. And it creates a more complete, sort of sweeping view of the story. And there can also be some sort of reverse suspense that happens when we know more than the characters know. Like we may know who the killer in the mystery is, and that the characters are in danger. And so we feel suspense, not because we don't know, but we feel suspense on the characters' behalf because they don't know and we know what the real danger is. Okay, so we've got our examples here, and we basically have the same little story or scene described in each of the point of views. So in first person, when Sid finally called, I played dumb. I wasn't ready to tell her that I knew the whole story. All right, so at this point, we only know the storyteller's point of view. We don't know what Sid is thinking. We know that she called, that action happened in the story, but we don't know what Sid was thinking about that. Okay, but then we move to third person limited, and now this I character we're describing in third, and she takes on a name. When Sid finally called, Alice played dumb. She wasn't ready to tell Sid that she knew the whole story. All right, so we basically have the same kind of information, but it was conveyed in third person. We only know what Alice is thinking. We don't know what Sid is thinking. So it's third person limited. But in the omniscient example, we're going to have access to both characters' thoughts. Sid was worried. That's new information. She couldn't stand to wait any longer. She finally called Alice, but Alice played dumb, not wanting to reveal that she knew the whole story. All right, so hopefully you see the difference there. Same scene, the same basic events happened in the story, but we have slightly different perspectives or points of view on them because of who tells the story. Okay, I'll read this and it'll be time for you to do a little bit of work with this. The point of view that an author uses influences the description of story events. For example, if an author uses first-person point of view, readers will know how the narrator feels, but readers will not know how the other characters in the story feel. If an author uses third-person omniscient, readers will know what the characters think and feel. Point of view affects how readers understand a story. It can also affect how readers respond to characters and events in a story. And sometimes when we're learning this in a longer format and have more time to practice, a good exercise to learn point of view is to take a little story in one point of view and you retell it in your own words from a different character's perspective within the story. Same events, but their unique perspective on what happens. And they can show in a dramatic way how the understanding of a story is heavily influenced by which character tells it and what that character thinks about what happens. Okay, as you read, think about who's telling the story. Think about whose thoughts and feelings the author reveals. Then think about how a point of view affects what you know and feel about the story events. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn you loose to both read the passages and do the questions, do the work that goes along with them. And when you finish the lesson, come back here and we'll walk through all of the answers and I'll explain. And you'll have a little bit more teaching as we go through that. All right, see you in a few minutes. Okay, so we're back here on page 45, and hopefully you have read the story After the Storm about how Jesse's attitudes about his father's shop change after a disaster happens in the community. So our first question says, reread paragraphs 1 through 5, which we've done off camera. Pay attention to words and phrases that describe what the characters think and how they feel. What details show that Jesse is unhappy but also feels guilty? I had the fact that he sighed. He felt embarrassed. And there's a quote, in paragraph 3, and he kind of trails off, my future, my whole life doing this. What am I doing? Nothing. That was found at the very bottom of the first page, right in paragraph 3. But all good supporting details that show that, Jesse has kind of conflicted mixed feelings. He's unhappy, but he's also feeling guilty that he does feel unhappy. Okay, reread paragraph 7. How do we know what Jesse's father is feeling? What details tell you how he feels? Okay, this is in third limited point of view. So we actually do not have access to Jesse's father's thoughts, but what we do have access to is like what happens and what he says. So for one thing, he says, "For me, it's been my life." He's talking about the store. So we know that he's feeling loss, that his store has been flooded and he's lost a lot of his livelihood. But also, let's see here. Jesse watched his dad's eyes shine with tears. So there's a physical detail that shows how Jesse's father is feeling. So even though the story is written in third limited and we really only have access to Jesse's thoughts, we can still see some of what other characters are feeling by what they do and what they say. Okay, number 3, reread the last paragraph. How do we know how Jesse feels? What details tell you this? Well, we're told directly that he feels at peace, and then we also have this observation that he thinks maybe this was his life and that was okay. So by the end of the story, Jesse feels acceptance and kind of the warmth and the value of community and how it comes together to help each other in times of need. And so we had some direct, some explicit information there that he felt at peace, as it said, but then also some implicit. We're gaining access to Jesse's thoughts, and we're kind of interpreting his mood by interpreting the thought. Okay, number 4, how would the story be different if Jesse's father were telling it? Well, the story might focus more on the pride that he takes in the store and his work, and maybe the feelings of regret that he has that his son hasn't taken much interest in what he does. Wanting Jesse to understand his own motivations, point of view, and why the store is important to him. So, with Jesse's point of view featured in Third Limited, we have a story about a young person who is kind of uncomfortable being tagged with his father's legacy, but then when his father's legacy comes under hardship, his feelings change and he starts to see the value in what his father values. If his father told the story, it would be certainly same events, but a much different theme, meaning from there. Okay, and then the next paragraph was, the next passage, losing a home. And in this one, we'll just dive into the questions. A little bit more straightforward, I think, than the previous one that we read. Number 5, it is in first person. We see a lot of I and me pronouns in there. Number 6, in this paragraph, what does telling the story from Joyce's point of view reveal that telling it from another character's point of view would not? And it's D, that Joyce was proud, that she felt pride when she bought her house. We might assume that as readers, but we would not know it unless we had access to her thoughts in first person. Okay, 7, what might the reader learn if Maria were telling the story? And it's kind of basic, but C, the reader would learn what Maria thought about Joyce. We would get a lot more detail, and we wouldn't be reliant upon what she says and does to know what she's thinking. Number 8, which of the following is unknown to the reader because of who is telling the story? Certainly it's Joyce's mother, who is not the narrator and is not covered by point of view in any way. 9, how might the ending be different if it were told from Maria's point of view? And this is kind of the clincher here. It's A, the reader would not know that Joyce was more hopeful. So the story might lose its meaning if it were told by a different character, or the meaning would change. So the point in all this is that authors choose their point of view very carefully, which character they want to have to tell a story, based on what the story means or what sort of effects they want characterization to have within the work. Okay, that's point of view. I hope that some of it was familiar to you. It's something that we get exposed to in school kind of early, but then we don't work with it a lot, and it ends up falling by the wayside. But do keep a good handle on it in your memory, because we're going to be using it a little bit in the next strategy. Okay, have a good one. I'll see you next time.